On page 127, we now want to focus our attention on the hormones that are released from the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, also known as the adenohypophysis. What does adeno mean? Gland. It means a gland. It is a true endocrine gland. Now, the secretory cells of the adenohypophysis release a whole bunch of different hormones that we're going to be learning about. GH, and we're going to see it's all written down, growth hormone, TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, LH, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. We're going to be going through all of those. But before we do, the actual release of these hormones from these cells is in fact controlled by hypothalamic neurons up in the hypothalamus. We can clearly see that the hypothalamus of our brain is at the center of homeostasis, but it's controlling the release of so many different hormones. Now, these hypothalamic neurons that are up in the hypothalamus, they can conduct action potentials down their length, and they end right here at the bottom of the hypothalamus. And they release these neurotransmitters into blood vessels that carry these neurotransmitters from the hypothalamus to the adenohypophysis. And because these neurotransmitters control the release of hormones from these cells of the adenohypophysis, these neurotransmitters are commonly called releasing hormones, because they control the release. They're carried in the bloodstream, they act as hormones, then they control the release of hormones from the adenohypophysis. They are carried through these blood vessels known as the hypothalamic pituitary portal veins down to these cells. You might ask, did you write any of this down? Yes, I did. So you'll notice right here we wrote, the hypothalamus secretes releasing hormones, really neurotransmitters, that affect the secretion of hormones by the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland, also known as the adenohypophysis. These releasing hormones are carried to the anterior pituitary gland via the hypothalamic pituitary portal veins. And then we wrote that different releasing hormones from the hypothalamic neurons stimulate the release of different hormones from the anterior pituitary gland. So here we've got a picture that summarizes which neurotransmitters from the hypothalamus control the release of which hormones from the adenohypophysis. There is a neurotransmitter releasing hormone called CRH. It stands for corticotropin-releasing hormone. And it causes certain secretory cells in the adenohypophysis to release a hormone that affects the adrenal gland called ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. We will have much more to say about that. There is another neurotransmitter releasing hormone called TRH. It stands for Thyrotropin-Releasing Hormone, and it causes certain secretory cells in the adenohypophysis to release TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, also known as thyrotropin. Furthermore, there is another hypothalamic neurotransmitter called gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, and it controls the release of both FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which we have learned previously about when we talked about the menstrual cycle. You'll notice that I've described that ACTH, TSH, LH, and FSH are tropic hormones. The definition of a tropic hormone is that they are hormones that affect other endocrine glands. And we're going to be seeing that this one affects the adrenal gland, this one affects the thyroid gland, and FSH and LH affect the reproductive organs, which are glands in the respect that they secrete sex hormones. So those are called tropic hormones. On the other hand, here on the right, boxed in, we have two hormones, growth hormone and prolactin. Now, growth hormone affects the growth of the whole body. It does not affect another endocrine gland. And prolactin is, as we're going to be learning, controls the production of milk by the mammary glands. Now, are the mammary glands an endocrine gland? No, they don't release any hormones, so they produce milk. So what kind of gland is the mammary gland if it's not an endocrine gland? It's an exocrine gland. So if you still don't know the difference between an exocrine gland and endocrine gland, during the first week we told you to make sure you reviewed that. So make sure you understand the difference between an endocrine gland and an exocrine gland and the different definition. Now you'll notice that in both these two cases, the release of growth hormone and prolactin, there's actually a releasing hormone neurotransmitter and an inhibitory hormone neurotransmitter. One causes the release of growth hormone, TRH, and one inhibits the release of growth hormone. That's the IH, inhibitory hormone. Similarly, there's a PRH and a PIH, a prolactin-releasing hormone that causes certain secretory cells of the adenohypophysis to release prolactin, and there's a PIH, a prolactin inhibitory hormone that inhibits the release of prolactin. Now, why in these two cases we have to have not only a neurotransmitter that causes its release, but also an inhibitory neurotransmitter that prevents the release, whereas in these cases we did not need an inhibitory neurotransmitter. We will explain that. It really comes down to a negative feedback loop as to why there's that difference, but we'll explain that. Now, what I'd like to do is look at page 134. And on page 134, just before the charts, which begin on 134A, and this summarizes the hormones released by these secretory cells of the adenohypophysis, also known as the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. And so you'll notice that it shows two hormones that are not tropic hormones and four hormones that are tropic hormones. If you're scratching your head thinking, what's a tropic hormone again? I wrote it right here. The word tropic means literally it affects, A-F-F-E-C-T. It affects another endocrine gland. So what are the four hormones released by the adenohypophysis that affect other endocrine glands? They include, of the four, Thyrotropin Hormone. Notice the ending tropic or tropin. It affects the thyroid gland, and it actually, as we will see, controls the release of thyroxin by the thyroid gland. Another one, right here, is adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. It affects the adrenal cortex, which releases, as we're going to see, it controls the release of what are called glucocorticosteroids by the adrenal cortex endocrine gland. And it includes two gonadotropic hormones. Tropic means to affect. So gonadotropic means to affect the gonads, the reproductive organs, both the testes in a guy and the ovaries in a female. And the name of these two gonadotropic hormones, as we've learned quite some time ago back in section C, are follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, also known as LH. Those are the four tropic hormones. Thyrotropic hormone, the two gonadotropic hormones, and ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. What are the two hormones that are not tropic hormones? Growth hormone. It does not affect another endocrine gland. It affects the growth of the entire body, including the skeleton and the muscles. So it's not affecting an endocrine gland. And prolactin, or lactogenic hormone, which causes production of milk in the mammary glands. The mammary glands are an exocrine gland, not an endocrine gland. So this is a summary chart of all these hormones, 6 different hormones that are released by the adenohypophysis. We're going to start our analysis of these 6 hormones, starting with the thyrotropic hormone, also known as thyroid stimulating hormone. And if we go back to page 129, on page 129, so it says at the top, hormones secreted by the anterior lobe of the pituitary And the first one we're going to start with is thyrotropin. It affects the thyroid gland. It's also called thyroid-stimulating hormone because it stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin. Now, we've heard the word thyroid hormone or thyroxin, but in fact, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Everything always is, isn't it? There's actually two major thyroid hormones. The one that we commonly call thyroxin is technically called tetraiodothyronine, or T4 for short. Tetra means four. And you can see a picture of it right here, tetraiodothyronine. What does tetraiodo mean? 4 iodine atoms. There it is. And we know that our thyroid gland is the only organ in the entire body that needs iodine in order to work, because in order to make this hormone, it has iodine as part of it. So most of us choose to purchase iodized salt to make sure we get enough iodine in our diet. All right, that's called T4. Now, the thyroid gland also produces triiodothyronine with 3 iodine atoms, abbreviated T3. Most of what the thyroid gland secretes is T4, but it does secrete smaller amounts of T3. Interestingly, T3 is actually more potent, more powerful than T4 in its actions. Now, what does thyroxin, T4 and T3, what do they do? So to review what thyroxin does, let's look at page 134C. 134C. So on page 134C at the bottom, so on the bottom of 134C, thyroxin, T4, and also T3. What is the source of this hormone? Where does it come from? The thyroid gland. What are the functions of thyroxin? Thyroxin increases all the biochemical reactions in our body, both anabolic and catabolic. And what's the term we use collectively to refer to both anabolic and catabolic reactions? Metabolic. We first learned these terms on pages B1 and B2, where we talked about metabolic reactions, and we divided them into anabolic and catabolic. Thyroxin speeds up catabolic reactions, including the breakdown of foods for energy to make ATP. So it speeds up energy production. It increases specifically cellular respiration, the breakdown of sugars and fats for energy to make ATP. Now, since we know that over half the energy that's released for breaking apart sugars goes off as heat, so in fact, therefore, thyroxin affects our heat production. So as it's causing us to make it more energy, it's also causing us to generate more heat simultaneously. Not only does thyroxin speed up these catabolic reactions producing energy and heat, but also anabolic reactions associated with growth and development, which are especially important not so much as adults, but as children. It promotes normal growth and development. So in fact, on the first box here, we wrote that if one had a deficiency of thyroxin as an adult, that would be called hypothyroidism. Not enough thyroxin. And so all these biochemical reactions would be slower than normal, and that would include slowed down rate of cellular respiration. Well, if cellular respiration slows down because of hypothyroidism, what does that do to your energy production? It's less than normal. And what does that do to heat production? It's less than normal, right? And there's less heat. So basically, two of the classic symptoms that somebody might have hypothyroidism is they're low in energy and they're cold. Furthermore, since it slows down with the deficiency of thyroxin, the rate at which you're breaking down food is slower than normal. What do you think happens to your body weight? You tend to gain weight because rather than breaking down that food for energy, you accumulate that food on your body, so you tend to gain weight. So classically, if somebody says, my gosh, I'm low in energy, I'm cold all the time, and I'm gaining weight, so in fact, they might have hypothyroidism. Now, there's only a way to know for sure, and that's to actually measure the thyroxin hormone level in the bloodstream and see if it falls within the normal range, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Not only do these decrease, but your heart rate slows down, it's lower than normal, and your blood pressure goes lower than normal. These are the classic symptoms of hypothyroidism that you should certainly know. Now, they give a special name for hypothyroidism, a deficiency during childhood. Because if a child is deficient in thyroxin, not only is it slowing down energy production, but it's slowing down normal growth and development. And it results in a condition known as cretinism. Cretinism is an individual who is both physically short and also mentally retarded, because the brain, the nervous system, does not develop normally. You actually have a picture of that on page 115, as I made a note of right here. And on page 115, this is actually on the brain section, there's a picture of a cretin. I think we had mentioned this previously when we were giving you an overview of the brain areas. And you can see that it's written right here on the outline on the left, that's retarded development of the brain and the rest of the body caused by a deficiency of thyroxin from birth. Now, this is such a serious effect of having hypothyroidism during infancy and childhood that because it's so serious, the state of California and most other states in the United States today require that all newborn babies be tested for thyroxin hormone levels in their bloodstream. Because if they find that they have hypothyroidism, they immediately start them on Synthroid, synthetic thyroxin, to prevent them from becoming cretins. Because the state of California believes, and I agree with this state, that it would be tragic for a child to end up being mentally retarded when it was totally preventable had they simply tested and put them on thyroxin right from infancy. Back on 134C, what are the factors that stimulate the release of thyroxin? And the answer is thyrotropin, also known as TSH, released from the adenohypophysis. And what would decrease the release of thyroxin? A decreased level of thyrotropin, or TSH, from the adenohypophysis. Now, to help us understand how thyrotropin, or TSH, regulates the release of thyroxin from the thyroid gland, let's take a look at a picture on page 128. And on page 128, on the lower left, so this is page 128, and here we basically see the negative feedback control mechanism of how your thyroid gland is regulated. So here's what we see, and we're going to see this pattern repeated for all 4 of the tropic hormones that we've described. It begins with the hypothalamus. Certain neurons in the hypothalamus release a neurotransmitter called TRH, Thyrotropin-Releasing Hormone. This is carried in the bloodstream to the adenohypophysis, or anterior pituitary gland. This TRH stimulates certain cells in the adenohypophysis to release thyrotropin, also known as thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. Thyrotropin is released into the bloodstream. It circulates in the bloodstream, and it specifically affects the thyroid gland. It stimulates the cells of the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin, T4 and T3, into the bloodstream. Now, this is a control mechanism. It is regulated through a negative feedback loop. Let me remind you for the 50th time, if you never read the first chapter covering homeostasis and negative feedback loops, it's still not too late. This is the major theme of any human physiology course and a major theme in medicine. So what we see is that as the thyroxin hormone levels rise in the bloodstream, that actually acts to inhibit cells of the adenohypophysis from releasing thyrotropin. That's known as the short negative feedback loop. And furthermore, the increasing thyroxin even inhibits the hypothalamus from releasing TRH. That's known as the long negative feedback loop. This prevents oversecretion of thyroxin. So basically what's going on is this. TRH causes the adenohypophysis to release thyrotropin or TSH into the bloodstream. Thyrotropin stimulates the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin into the bloodstream. As the thyroid secretes more and more thyroxin, that actually inhibits the hypothalamus from releasing any more TRH. It inhibits the adenohypophysis from releasing any more thyrotropin, and that shuts off the release of the thyrotropin, so the thyroid stops secreting any more thyroxin. As a result, most people, normal people, do not become hyperthyroid. They don't oversecrete thyroxin. Now, all hormones are broken down just like all neurotransmitters are broken down. Haven't we learned that every neurotransmitter has enzymes that break it down so that the effects don't just keep going on and on and on and on? Well, similarly, all hormones are broken down. Now, the most important location where most hormones are broken down by enzymes is in our liver. Our liver is the major, quote, detox organ that breaks down most hormones. So as the thyroxin hormone starts to be broken down such that the thyroxin hormone level starts to go lower and lower, as the thyroxin hormone level decreases in the bloodstream, that takes away the inhibition, because it was the high levels of thyroxin that inhibit the hypothalamus and inhibit the pituitary. So as the liver breaks down the thyroxin hormone level in the bloodstream goes down. That takes away the inhibition. The hypothalamus starts to release more TRH, causing the adenohypophysis to release more thyrotropin, which causes the thyroid to start secreting thyroxin again to bring the level back up to where it should be. I've mentioned before that this negative feedback loop concept is not all that different from the way your flush toilet works. When you flush the toilet, the water in the tank goes down and the water turns on to raise the level back up. When it reaches the correct level, the water turns off. So it stops filling up the tank anymore, so it doesn't overflow. Then you flush the toilet, the water level goes down, the water turns on and brings it back up. So that's really similar, really not all that dissimilar to what's going on here. And that ensures a constant thyroxin hormone level. Now on the next page on 129, so as we look on page 129, I summarize this here at the top of 129, negative feedback loop. We wrote that thyrotropin increases the thyroxin secretion into the bloodstream, and the increasing thyroxin level in the bloodstream inhibits the release of any more thyrotropin. We just showed you the negative feedback loop. If we look here at the bottom of the page, this shows a lab form where blood tests were run on a patient. They measured both the T3 and the T4 level. I'm just going to focus on the T4 level because that's the main thyroxin hormone. According to this lab form, the normal T4 thyroxin level should be between 5.5 and 11.5 micrograms per deciliter. I'm not asking you to memorize that, but that's what it is. They measured this patient's thyroxin level. Perhaps he had symptoms or complained of feeling low in energy and cold all the time, gaining weight. And they found that his T4 thyroxin level was 6.9. Did he have hypothyroidism? No, he didn't, because 6.9 falls within the normal range. So this doctor would not, I'm sure, would not prescribe thyroxin for him because his thyroxin hormone levels were normal. Now, could there be other causes of why he felt cold all the time, perhaps, and low in energy? Yes, there are. We will be learning that people who are anemic, who have a low red blood cell count, can also feel low in energy and cold all the time, and so on, for other reasons related to oxygen delivery for cellular respiration. So we would want to also run tests on their red blood cell count. There's always, everything is always multifactorial. It doesn't just depend upon one thing. There's lots of things that can present similar symptoms. And so the only way to differentiate between and make a diagnosis is by running the test to see what's the actual cause. Now, what's this RIA business, T4-RIA? I'll just briefly mention that one of the common ways they measure these minute levels of hormones in the bloodstream was originally developed in the 1970s by a biochemist researcher by the name of Rosalind Yalow at Columbia Medical Center. And she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in the 1970s for developing this method of measuring these very small, minute levels of hormones in the bloodstream called RIA, radioimmunoassay. Those of you who've had micro know that antibodies are very specific as to what they attach to. So knowing that, she developed a way of making antibodies to hormones. And so, because antibodies to a hormone will just attach to a hormone, the specific hormone that it's been produced for. And in order to measure the binding of the antibody with the hormone, she used a radioactive form of that antibody. So that's why it's called radio, as in radioactive, immuno, as in antibody, immune response, radioimmunoassay. Now they have some newer techniques today that do not require a radioactive isotope form of the antibody, but all of the methods for measuring these minute levels of hormones in the bloodstream do involve producing an antibody against that hormone because it binds very, very specifically. So that's what RIA refers to, and you'll see that term all over the place. When they commonly measure hormone levels, they will do it using radioactive tracers and so on, radioactive isotopes, or other antibodies. In every hospital, there's a department called nuclear medicine, where they use all kinds of radioactive tracers. To summarize this mechanism one more time, to help us, let's take a look at page 130A. 130A. So let's walk our way through this picture. What it's showing up here is here's a hypothalamic neuron, a neuron in the hypothalamus. It is releasing a neurotransmitter called TRH, Thyrotropin-Releasing Hormone. These were all listed on page 127. This neurotransmitter enters the bloodstream. And the name of these blood vessels are called the hypothalamic pituitary portal veins. This neurotransmitter is carried in the bloodstream down to the adenohypophysis. There it causes certain specific secretory cells in the adenohypophysis to release the hormone thyrotropin, also known as TSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, into the bloodstream. Thyrotropin, or TSH, circulates in our bloodstream, and it specifically stimulates the cells of the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin, T4 and T3, into the bloodstream. Now, what prevents us from over-secreting the thyroxin? As the thyroid gland, as the thyrotropin causes the thyroid gland to secrete more and more thyroxin, the thyroxin hormone levels in our bloodstream start to rise. The increasing levels of thyroxin in our bloodstream inhibit these cells, these secretory cells in the adenohypophysis from releasing any more thyrotropin. That shuts off further secretion of thyrotropin and prevents over-secretion of thyroxin. That is an example of a negative feedback response, or negative feedback loop. This is known as the short negative feedback loop. The increasing thyroxin hormone levels in the bloodstream also inhibit the hypothalamic neurons from releasing TRH. So that is called the long negative feedback loop. This is a negative feedback response. This is basically what all of physiology is about. All right, so that ensures the normal levels. Now, just to remind you, we said that our liver is going to start to break down these hormones, including thyroxin, and as thyroxin levels, our thyroxin is broken down in the bloodstream, the level of thyroxin will start to decline, go down. That'll take away the inhibition, and the hypothalamic neurons will start to release TRH again, and the TRH will cause cells of the adenohypophysis to release thyrotropin again, and that will stimulate the thyroid gland to start secreting thyroxin again. Now, going back to 128, it's that same picture. I could have used the picture we just looked at. If somebody has a low level of thyroxin in their bloodstream, it could be that the problem is the thyroid gland. Their thyroid gland is not secreting enough thyroxin. If the problem is in the thyroid gland, that's called primary hypothyroidism. But it's possible that the reason why the thyroid gland isn't secreting very much thyroxin could be because the pituitary, the adenohypophysis, isn't secreting enough thyrotropin. If the real problem is in the pituitary, that's called secondary hypothyroidism. The only reason why the thyroxin hormone level is low is because the pituitary isn't secreting enough of this thyrotropin or TSH to stimulate the thyroid to secrete thyroxin. In fact, it's then even possible that the only reason why the pituitary isn't secreting enough thyrotropin is because the hypothalamic neurons aren't secreting enough TRH, Thyrotropin-Releasing Hormone. If the real problem is up in the hypothalamus, that's called third level or tertiary hypothyroidism. Now, on the one hand, we might simply argue, look, Professor Fink, what difference does it make whether the problem is in the thyroid or the pituitary or even up there in the hypothalamus? Isn't it true that if a patient has hypothyroidism, they need thyroxin? They need synthetic thyroxin or synthroid. It doesn't matter whether the problem is here, here, or up here. You're right. They're going to be needing thyroxin in any case. But if the problem is up in the pituitary or up in the hypothalamus, it might be a much more serious problem than simply hypothyroidism, because there could be other things going on here if the real problem is up in the pituitary gland or in the brain. So a doctor who simply went and said, you know, they were low in thyroxin, I measured the thyroxin hormone levels, but I never bothered to check whether the thyrotropin levels were normal or not. I figured they're just going to give them thyroxin anyhow, so I never bothered to check. And then they found out that there was a tumor or something growing in their pituitary or brain, and the patient may have died 6 months later. And imagine how the family would have felt if they had found out from other doctors that any good doctor would have checked to make sure that the reason why they had low thyroxin was not because of a low thyrotropin level or something abnormal up in the pituitary or even up in the hypothalamus of the brain. To help us understand this, let's take a look at page 224A. It's 224A. Now, this scary-looking form shows the most common blood tests that doctors run. And by the time we actually get to 224A, we will understand 70% of the information on this page, on 224A. All that we're given as far as information is that it's a female patient. Now, they did all kinds of blood tests on her, and we will learn more about this later, but I want to draw your attention to the bottom here, towards the bottom of 224A, where they measured her T4 level by RIA. T4, tetraiodothyronine, also known as thyroxin, and they measured it by radioimmunoassay. And they found that her thyroxin level was 2.6. The units are micrograms per deciliter, and this is the normal range. So how would you describe this patient? Here's her thyroxin level, here's the normal range. She has hypothyroidism. Unlike that other guy, whose thyroxin level was in the normal range, hers is lower than normal. She does have hypothyroidism. This was a good doctor because they actually not only ran T4 levels, they ran TSH. Thyrotropin is also known as TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. They measured her TSH, or thyrotropin levels. They got 77. The normal range is 0.3 to 5 milli-international units per liter. So, here's the question. Clearly, her TSH is outside the normal range. Is her problem the thyroid, or is it the pituitary?
The thyroid. No, the thyroid.
It is the thyroid. Let's make sure we understand how to interpret this. I know that as you're looking at this, you're going, look, that's so high, it must be the pituitary. Let's analyze this. Going back to our page 138, on our 130A diagram, we could have used the one on 129, same thing. Look, her thyroxin levels are very, very low. They're lower than normal. She has hypothyroidism. They measured her thyrotropin, her TSH levels. They're really high. Clearly, her pituitary is able to produce lots of thyrotropin. It's just that her thyroid gland isn't responding. It's barely secreting any thyroxin. Look, the only way that, if the pituitary is releasing either the normal level of thyrotropin or more than normal, it's clearly functioning, and it's just trying to get the damn thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin. What it would look like if somebody had the problem of the pituitary for hypothyroidism is if they measured the thyroxin levels and the thyroxin was lower than normal, and then they measured the TSH or thyrotropin level and it was also lower than normal, then we would say, you know why the thyroxin level is lower than normal? Because the thyrotropin or TSH level is lower than normal. So that's what we would, in that case, we would say the real problem is the pituitary, or maybe even up in the hypothalamus. We'd have to test the TRH level. But the problem is if the pituitary is not releasing enough thyrotropin, that would explain why the thyroid isn't secreting enough thyroxin. In this case, the pituitary is releasing massive amounts of thyrotropin or TSH. And you might say, but why is it so high? Why did she have a thyrotropin or TSH level of 77, so much higher than normal? And the answer is her thyroxin hormone level in the blood is so low, it's not inhibiting these cells at all. So these cells are not being inhibited, so they're just secreting a lot of thyrotropin. It's simply, and it's doing exactly what we would want it to do. It's trying to get the damn thyroid gland to work, and it's not working. So that's the classic way most people who have hypothyroidism, the problem is in the thyroid, not in the pituitary, and the way it looks is exactly like this patient on page 224. This is the most common way that it appears. They will have low thyroxin levels, but their TSH level will be higher than normal. That's simply indicating the problem is in the thyroid, not the pituitary. The pituitary is doing fine. It's trying to secrete, it's secreting a lot of thyrotropin. It's trying to get the thyroid gland to secrete thyroxin. That's called primary hypothyroidism, and that's the most common form of hypothyroidism. Understanding thyroxin is really, really important. It is one of the most common of all the clinical disorders.